Video, we will be looking at 3 horrifying caving stories that went terribly wrong. The first story, in particular, highlights the incredible lengths a true friend will go to save someone they deeply care about. But will that love be enough? And for the other 2, well, they are even more painful to watch. As always, viewer discretion advised. In March 1997, 2 friends, Andrew and Attila, planned on a caving expedition. The anticipation had been building for weeks. They had been planning their trip to Real Well in Tennessee with growing excitement, eager to face the thrill of descending its infamous 160-foot entrance pit. Both had a few caving trips under their belts, though Attila, at 26, was still relatively new to the sport. He had visited only 5 caves previously, but his enthusiasm more than made up for his lack of experience. Andrew, 32 and more seasoned, took the lead in their planning, and they felt confident they had what it took to handle whatever the cave threw at them. Or so they thought. The morning of March 18th arrived with overcast skies and a persistent drizzle. As they approached the cave entrance, they could hear the ominous roar of the water cascading into the pit, louder than expected. Andrew paused, glancing over at Attila, who stood next to the ropes and equipment they had laid out by the mouth of the cave. They had their wetsuits in the car, but looking at the weather and the cold air around them, neither thought they'd need them. The decision to leave those wetsuits behind would become one of many critical mistakes. Despite the waterfall's intensity, they pressed on. Their excitement, perhaps arrogance, dulled their instincts to reconsider. They rigged their ropes directly in the waterfall's path, knowing they'd get wet, but underestimating how quickly the cold would overtake them. Attila, in his rush, hadn't brought a helmet, another crucial oversight, but at the time, the thrill of the descent overpowered thoughts of safety. Andrew rappelled down first, feeling the sting of the cold water hitting his back as he slid deeper into the pit. The waterfall was relentless, a torrent crashing around him, soaking his clothes and skin. By the time he hit the bottom, he was already chilled to the bone. Attila followed soon after, the water pounding down even harder, making the rope feel like a slippery serpent between his gloved hands. Inside the cave, the air was thick with moisture, the walls damp and gleaming in the faint light of their headlamps. The cave was beautiful, but the cold gnawed at them from the start. After only about 30 minutes of exploring, Attila began to feel uneasy. His body was trembling, his teeth chattering uncontrollably as the cold seeped in deeper. "Andrew, I can't stay down here," Attila said, his voice strained and weak, the discomfort apparent. "I think I need to get out." Andrew nodded, understanding that things were quickly going south. "All right, I'll get the ropes ready," he said, his voice steady despite his own discomfort. But the waterfall continued to roar, and even his hands, trained from years of experience, were starting to stiffen from the cold. Attila rigged his climbing system quickly, too quickly in hindsight. His setup consisted of a commercial seat harness and a hand-tied chest harness. Inexperienced as he was, he relied on a Petzl-handled ascender, which is designed to grip the rope as climbers move upward with a cow's tail sling attaching it to his harness. Unfortunately, his cow's tail was far too long, which would soon spell disaster. He also used a Petzl shunt, a mechanical device meant to be a backup safety device, but it too would complicate things. To make matters worse, Attila had rigged a chain of 6 non-locking carabiners to connect his seat ascender to his harness, another dangerous improvisation. Andrew noticed the hurried, jumbled setup and thought about saying something, but before he could, Attila was already on the rope, beginning his ascent. Each handhold was a battle against the freezing water streaming over him, his gear slick with moisture. The waterfall battered him relentlessly as he climbed, making his progress slow and exhausting. The shunt, which he had attached to a long foot sling, was giving him problems. It kept slipping, refusing to hold steady as it should. Halfway up, Attila stopped. His muscles were burning, and the cold had sapped much of his strength. His gear was failing him, piece by piece. The long chain of carabiners connecting his ascender had unhooked, leaving him suspended by the cow's tail, now stretched so far that he couldn't even reach the ascender to adjust it. He tried to communicate with Andrew, shouting through the deluge of water, but his words were swallowed by the deafening roar of the waterfall. "Attila, come back down if you need to," Andrew shouted from below, his voice barely reaching over the torrent. Attila tried to respond, but his words came out garbled, unclear. Minutes stretched into agonizing minutes, the water hammering him, the cold tightening its grip on his body. Finally, Andrew heard him call out, "I can't!" Andrew's heart raced. Attila was stuck, trapped in the waterfall with no way to free himself. Realizing how dire the situation had become, Andrew knew he had to act fast. Without hesitation, he clipped into the rope and began climbing up toward his friend. The ascent was grueling. Every foot he gained felt like a victory as the freezing water sapped his energy and his hands went numb against the wet rope. When Andrew reached Attila, the sight was grim. His friend was hanging limp in his harness, conscious but unable to move, his body nearly paralyzed by the cold. Hypothermia was already setting in, the signs unmistakable, the uncontrollable shivering, the pale skin, the lethargy. Andrew knew that the only way to save Attila was to perform a pick-off maneuver, a technical and often life-saving rescue technique in which the rescuer attaches the stranded climber to their own
Believe it or not, this dog used to be the
harness and descends with them to the ground. But under these conditions, with the waterfall pounding down on them and both of them freezing, it was far more difficult than in any training scenario. Andrew struggled to get his gear in place, his fingers numb and clumsy from the cold. He tried to attach Attila to his harness, but each attempt was thwarted by the relentless water and his dwindling strength. He knew the maneuver in theory, had practiced it a handful of times, but never in such extreme conditions. His muscles screamed with effort, his mind growing foggy as hypothermia crept into his own body. After several failed attempts, Andrew realized it wasn't going to work. Desperate, he tried another tactic, climbing out while tethered to Attila. If he could pull his friend up, maybe they could reach safety together. But the added weight was too much. After ascending only 15 feet, Andrew's strength gave out, his body shaking violently from exhaustion and the cold. He couldn't go any further. Now both of them were stuck, hanging in the freezing waterfall. Time was running out, and Andrew knew it. Attila was slipping further into unconsciousness, and Andrew's own body was on the verge of giving in. In one last desperate act, Andrew swung himself over to a ledge, fighting the overwhelming cold and the fatigue that threatened to overtake him. He managed to pull himself onto the ledge and unclip from the rope, collapsing into a trembling heap. His entire body was convulsing from the cold, his clothes soaked through, offering no protection against the elements. He crawled to a drier part of the ledge, his vision blurring, and before he knew it, he passed out. When Andrew finally awoke, hours had passed. His body was stiff and numb, his mind groggy and disoriented. But the reality of the situation came crashing down on him as soon as he saw Attila. His friend was still hanging in the waterfall, motionless. Andrew's stomach twisted with grief, but he knew what had to be done. He re-rigged his equipment, his hands shaking uncontrollably, barely able to manipulate the gear. With a heavy heart, he cut the tether that connected Attila to him. It was clear that his friend was gone. Andrew made the agonizing climb out of the cave alone, every step filled with the weight of what had happened. When he finally emerged, he collapsed and called for help. Rescue teams arrived hours later, finding Attila's body still suspended in the waterfall. A doctor on the scene confirmed what Andrew already knew. Attila had succumbed to hypothermia hours earlier. His makeshift climbing system, the cold and the harsh conditions had been too much. Looking back, it was clear that mistakes had been made from the start. Leaving the wetsuits behind, Attila's unsafe cobbled-together climbing gear, and their lack of experience with such a wet, vertical cave had all contributed to the tragedy. The fatal error was likely when one of the non-locking carabiners in Attila's chain of gear had come undone, leaving him stranded, unable to reach his ascender or his safety devices. This next story